All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Frank Analysis. I'm here with you guys with another panel discussion. What do we do about gun violence in the United States? How do we end this cycle? Because, as our good friend Compton J put it, I'm going to share out my screen real quick. This is a never ending cycle, right? American exceptionalism. We have a mass shooting event just like what we had in Uvalde, Texas. Rest in peace to all the people who died, all the children and teachers who passed away in that horrible event. Right after an event like that happens, we have the media talking about it nonstop. How horrible! This is what can we do about this? And then we have media personalities and politicians saying we need thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
And then there's debates on social media about what do we do about guns. And then in the end, no one actually does anything. And we're going to talk about why that is the case, that politicians don't actually do anything. The people who are supposed to change the policies of our country. And then people just forget about it and things go back to normal until the next mass shooting happens. So joining me to discuss all that, as you guys can see, such a lovely panel here. We have Robert Durden. We have James Fauntleroy from Revolutionary Blackout Network and his own show, the JB Font Show. We have Glory Jones from Slow News Day.
Woo woo.
And we have Sabrina Salvati from the Sabby Sabs Show and also from Revolutionary Blackout Network with James Fauntleroy. So thank you guys all for coming on here. Let's begin by, you can introduce yourself for the people who don't know, because we always can have like new audience members tuning in. And also, what is your stance on this? Is there a way that we can end this cycle that I just showed of mass shooting, media extravaganza, nothing actually gets done? Let's start with Robert.
Thanks for having me, Franco. Good to see all you guys. I look forward to a great conversation. I'm Robert Durden. I do Political Fight Club on Rockfin and YouTube. And the argument I've been making on my show about these mass shootings is that it's multifaceted, and you will not see a multifaceted approach by any of our politicians. Neither of the political parties will look at this in any way other than a binary way where you can bet your bottom dollar that Democrats are going to go, we need to take away guns. We need to get as many guns as we can out of the hands of citizens. And the Republican Party will say that we absolutely have to have mental health care. It has nothing to do with the guns. It has nothing to do with assault rifles being in the hands of citizens. It has everything to do with mental health issues. And is it too much for me to ask that we consider both of those options and doing both at once, like common sense gun control with possibly some mental health care, like Medicare for all, maybe with mental health care included? But that's what you're going to get regardless in America, because this is a wedge issue where they try to politicize a horrible mass shooting like this in order to run on it in the midterms, and it's really frustrating. So what I argued on my show, just as succinctly as I can put it here, is if you want to fight these things, it has to be a multifaceted approach that includes a little bit of gun control and a lot of it of mental health care. But also, if you want to fight the root cause of gun violence, you want to fight the root cause of crime. The same culprit is implicated in the two issues. It's poverty. You have to fight poverty if you want to fight fanatic and extreme behavior. And if you fight like wealth inequality in this country by giving people a living wage, giving them health care, including mental health care, if you remove the conditions that cause people to lose their mind, become, like this suicidal ideation, they get depression, they get anxiety because of the neglect and trauma inflicted upon them by the system that we have here, it's very difficult for people to go down the rabbit hole and end up doing horrible things like this. So if you want to view this through a Marxist lens, I think that's the solution long term. Is if you want to fight crime, you want to fight mass shootings, you remove the systematic trauma that is inflicted upon our populace long term, because people that are mentally well and aren't constantly under the boot of a totalitarian propaganda apparatus that scares the shit out of them all the time, they're less likely to gravitate towards fanaticism, extremist behavior. And if you actually fixed that, you would have a society that doesn't require wanting guns. Most of the citizenry wouldn't feel the need to go out and buy weapons if they feel safe and comfortable in their lives. So, like, my ultimate goal, or my ultimate way of defeating this long term, is you have to see it through economics and a Marxist lens. Fight poverty, and you'll fight crime, and you'll fight these extreme events. So, but I'm open to all options. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because of course it's a complicated issue.
Yeah, Sabrina, you want to piggyback off of that? Do you agree? Or is there anything else you want to add on? Oh, don't forget you're muted.
I think mental health is a big part of this, as well as we live in a violent country. I made the comparison the other day between the countries that have universal health care for everyone and countries like the United States that don't, and the rate of mass shootings. The United States far exceeds the other countries. So there is a mental health aspect to this, but at the same time, this is a part of the culture that we live in. We live in a country that's very violent when you compare us to other countries like Canada, like Sweden. I mean, people have guns, lots of guns in places like Sweden and Switzerland as well, but they don't have this rate of mass shootings. They don't have the gun violence that we have, but they have healthcare for everyone. So for people who say, well, if someone has a mental health issue, they should just go see a therapist or they should go get treatment. If you don't have health insurance, who's going to pay for that? How are you going to have the money to pay for that out of pocket? And even if you do have health insurance, not every health insurance plan actually covers mental health. So that's a big part of the problem. But I think the other thing about it is you have these politicians that are in office, both Democrats and Republicans, by the way. They're not really trying to push or create any type of gun reform that could get those automatic, or I don't say automatic, the military style weapons out of the hands of American people, or try to put some kind of laws in place to stop that. They're not even trying to do it. Chuck Schumer told you so himself that he doesn't see any type of legislation getting passed. So this is why we have that cycle that you just showed of what CJ put up. It's a constant cycle. It happens every time there's a mass shooting and nothing is ever done about it. What I think should happen is I think we, the people, we're going to have to put pressure on those politicians to actually do something. And I think that's going to come through direct action. So we're going to have to hit the streets. And I do know that one of the students from the Parkland high school shooting is actually trying to organize something to get people to march in DC to put pressure on those politicians. But in doing so, you also have to make sure that the Democratic Party does not co-opt that type of movement. But we're going to have to get that same type of movement that you saw after George Floyd's murder going in this country to really get them to do something, because otherwise they're not going to do anything. And there's still going to be these loopholes and people will still be able to get those kind of weapons at these gun shows.
Yeah. James, what do you think? How can we end this cycle?
Oh boy. Thanks for having me. Look, this is a very violent country. Very violent country. And I would be remiss if I pointed out that we cannot talk about these mass shootings without also talking about these slow, spread out mass shootings by police as well. Because they are also part of the equation of the violence that we see in this nation. And so the thing is, a lot of people, they want to talk about mass shooters, but the thing is that the police are also culpable in a lot of mass shootings that happen in our community too. So I think they are both coupled together. And the thing is like what Robert has spoke about and Sabrina spoke about so far is that it's a systemic thing. As far as number one, healthcare, right? We don't have that. Number two, the systemic things, because people have what we call diseases of despair, right? And so these diseases of despair automatically put people in a weird headspace where they may end up doing something that characteristically may be out of character, uncharacteristic for them. But also, what are we also experiencing? We also have this huge problem with white supremacy in this nation, right? Because some of these mass shooters, there's nothing wrong with them up here. It's just they honestly are, at the point where they feel, they look at the great replacement theory and things like that, and they automatically just think, well, we just got to get rid of the black people. So look what happened in Buffalo at the Tops, store, or look at what happened, with Dylan Roof when he went into, a church and shot up, all the black people. So the thing is that it's a multifaceted thing. One of the things that we have to do is get rid of a lot of the white supremacy, but that's systemically within our government. And some of that is also even within the police force and the FBI. It's in the upper echelons of government. Hell, it's even in the presidency. So the thing is that that's something that we have to do. And like what Savvy said, we have to use outside pressure in order to be able to get this change. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Gun reform would come tomorrow if a lot of black people started picking up weapons and open carrying. Because it happened in the past with Governor Reagan when he was governor of California, and the Black Panthers decided to open carry with their rifles. Yeah. And he was like, "Oh no, too many Negroes with guns. We have to do gun reform." And guess what? Y'all got the gun reform, but then they relaxed it a little bit over time, right? They were like, "Oh no, not so many black people have guns anymore," But unfortunately, that's the way it goes. And so, I mean, look at Canada. Bless you. Canada has a lot of guns. Canada has a lot of guns too, but they don't have as many, gun violence as we do. So really, it's about the systemic issues that we face. But the problem is that if we face these systemic issues, then that means that the powers that be lose their power, because then that means we're putting more power back in the hands of the people.
Yeah. Glory Jones, activist. Enlighten us. What do you think we should do?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say I'm going to enlighten you guys. I mean, you're all pretty smart individuals, but I will say I'll offer my perspective and you can take it if you so desire. So, I mean, I'll open my statement by saying this. We, without a doubt, as everybody here can agree, we have a violence problem in America. We have a mental health problem in America. We have a gun violence problem in America. But that being said, I am against disarming the working class and minorities until we see the military audited and until we see police disarmed. Because the unfortunate fact of the matter is that, if minorities in the working class surrender their gun rights, then who truly do we have left to protect us? And yes, I know there's a talking point where it's like, oh, you think your AR-15 is going to stand up to a drone and a tank and a yada, yada, yada. We lost to rice farmers in Vietnam. We also lost the Afghan war to people who basically were playing Ring Around the Rosie with a couple of assault rifles and called that it in some poppy fields. Obviously I'm exaggerating the details here, but the point is, regardless of what you think people's chances would be against the full force of the American military, that doesn't negate guaranteeing them the right towards some self-defense, especially when it comes to the fact that we do have a violence problem at the root of it. If you took away guns, I don't think our violence problem would go away, because we have such a mental health crisis. And like JB Font says, we have a pandemic of police brutality against minority communities, against unarmed black men, that precedes any sort of gun violence, unfortunately, because it comes back to the days where they were fucking slave catchers and the newly freed slaves didn't even own any weapons. So, I mean, it's just from that standpoint, and taking after the standpoint of, the Black Panthers, I'm kind of against any sort of very hyper reactionary gun control. But that being said, I do have I do have kind of a history with the March for Our Lives movement. It's not something I talk about a lot because it was before I became like an activist. But Stoneman Douglas, which was the shooting in Parkland, that happened like 15 minutes away from my school. And like I went to Cypress Bay High School. For those of you that don't know what Cypress Bay is, we were considered the sister school to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And you know, like we were so close to the point where like my high school basketball team was actually
Oh,
scheduled. Whoa, sorry.
you're still
My
here.
Yeah, my
There's an
high school
accident.
basketball team was actually scheduled to play Stoneman Douglas in the regional quarterfinals the day after the shooting happened. Obviously, the game ended up getting canceled and no one really felt like playing. But, like, you know, it was something very close to me. And it was something that, like, you know, completely spurred me into this, like, whole into this whole like fervor of like we need 100% gun control, we need to crack down, we need to be exactly like California, we need to ban all these, like repeal the Second Amendment, yada yada yada, like all that. But then I just took a step back and I you know went back to a lot of Black Panther teachings. I went back to seeing how, you know, there are other cultures that own a lot of guns and really don't experience the same problems that we do. You know, regardless of what anybody's takes on this are, I think I think the primary takeaway from it, regardless, I think the primary takeaway from the school shooting in Texas should be like there's something deeply fucked up and wrong with this society if if school shootings are becoming an annual occurrence. There's something so deeply wrong with that idea that yeah, no, I can't even go deeper into that because it's just insane. But yeah, um and then I'm sorry for rambling on, but like there's more I want to say too because I to speak more to JB Fawn's quote about the police. Um, the police were a great hindrance and issue in not only the Parkland shooting because he refused to go into the building and stop the shooter or shooters because that's contested honestly, but they also didn't do shit to protect the kids in Texas. And it's like what the fuck do we even have them for? And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up is how do I put this into words? There is a very tangible problem with the FBI coming in and radicalizing lonely fucking kids and incels.
Hmm.
It's exactly how you get groups like White Lives Matter gaining traction all of a sudden after years of being in hiding because they literally hang out in these chat rooms and they recruit people and like obviously. And it's just these institutions at the core of our country literally feeding off of these dormant energies of racism. It's like people don't think this shit naturally. It has to be taught. And who is it taught by? The fucking FBI, unfortunately, and also the CIA too. So that's unfortunately something in common as well with a lot of these shootings is the shooter having contact with the fucking FBI and being known to be radicalized by them. So that's something else that I want to bring forward. But again, like the first takeaway from this should be is like there's something so deeply wrong from whichever angle you want to look at it, whether it's the gun violence angle, whether it's the police brutality angle, where it's the fuck the FBI angle. It's just so fucking like wrong and disgusting, and it's like really emblematic of how truly fucked up the United States is.
I
Yeah.
Yeah, I love how all you guys said that this is not an isolated issue. Like it ties in with all these other issues, the education system, our politicians who just virtue signal and don't actually try to solve the problem, the weapons manufacturing companies, our education system, which is supposed to teach us how to be functioning peoples in society. But in reality, what they do is teach us how to be drones for these ruling corporations, these ruling families that own these corporations. Just be an obedient worker. You know, not it doesn't teach us how to be truly happy. It doesn't teach us how to manage certain social situations, social circumstances that affects our mental health. And then we get, as Gloria Jones was saying, like, it's disgusting to see how we live in this society where people think people think that they can let their anger out by killing a bunch of kids, killing a bunch of innocent people. And then we can also say it's disgusting how these politicians virtue signal, and they know they're virtue signaling. They know they're not going to actually do anything because they're in the pockets of the NRA. They're in the pockets of the military-industrial complex. So it should enrage all of us when we see Joe Biden, our president, saying things like, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? You're the freaking president. What are you going to do? Right? You were just pushing Congress to give weapons to another country.
Yeah.
You help fund Israel, which is pretty much genociding Palestinians.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia genociding people in Yemen. And then ultimately, since all these politicians are bought off by all these lobbyists, they're bought off by the NRA, they're never going to actually do anything to affect the pockets of the NRA lobbyists. So, and they're also not going to do anything to change the education system because they don't want a society that is actually truly conscious, because then the whole system would change and we won't have these greedy families in charge. So what I think we can do, aside from, on top of having protests and educating people about the problems and how these politicians are not going to save us, is doing what the Black Panthers did, having community systems, homeschooling systems, in which we not only teach people real history, not only do we teach people how to manage their finances, but we also can teach them how to be more happy. We can teach them psychology. We can teach them how to manage their mental health, self-help lessons, how to be more spiritual, or teach them philosophy. At the very least, by doing that, we can have more people that can spread that message to other people, and we can help create a more conscious society that way. It can be a domino effect. So I'll leave it up to you guys to let me know what you guys think about what I said. Robert, enlighten us. What do you think?
Well, what I think is what you're describing there, Franco, is like real communism. You start to build community, and people in their neighborhoods take care of one another, and you start to see mental health kind of get better because you don't feel so alone, you don't feel isolated. You know that if something goes wrong in your car, you know somebody that can help you fix it. If you help picking your kids up from school, you have a neighbor that's willing to help you. You build true Jesus-style communism, and it's very difficult for mental health, or like JB said, diseases of despair to foment in conditions like that. So I think what you're talking about is extremely valuable, and it's one of the side effects of true communism, helping people out and trying to get rid of exploitation that is built into the American capitalist system. Is you necessarily build community. Community helps fight mental illness. So I think that's an extraordinarily valuable thing to pass on, and sort of side effect of trying to, just maintain equality within your own community and help use the community also drive politics. Now, if you won't, just for a second, I'd like to piggyback off of some things that everyone said. Going back to what Lori was talking about, the FBI is absolutely able to pick off and get at a lot of these isolated kids who are prone to this type of thing. Same thing with white supremacist groups. You get rid of poverty, and you start creating homes that are not broken economically, and where the parents are neglectful or straight out abusive to their kids. A lot of these kids that end up doing these types of things, and I imagine the same thing goes for Salvador Ramos, who just committed this horrible atrocity. They're often lone wolves from broken households who feel like society doesn't understand them. So they turn to extremist ideology and scapegoating stuff like this. So that makes them prone to being picked off by people like Glory was talking about in the FBI, but also within extremists like white supremacist groups. So in a way, you fight poverty, you correct the household economic issue that creates these kids in the first place, making them more immune to being picked off by these groups, right? You try radicalizing a rich kid. You're not going to radicalize a rich white kid in general. It comes from broken households. So you fight poverty, you fight the vulnerability that these people often have towards being brought to become extremists in the first place. And then a couple other things, just real briefly here. I think that the propaganda apparatus in this country has a lot to do with what Savvy was talking about. Our culture is so diverse, and we're kind of like gun nuts, but that's by design. Since World War II, movies and media in general in this country have been utilized by the capitalist class to kind of encourage good little soldiers, people that are willing to be soldiers in wars because they've seen all the Rambo movies or Schwarzenegger or old Clint Eastwood movies, that we've sort of Hollywoodized and created a media apparatus that convinces Americans that being warlike is sexy in a weird way. But that's by design, because that creates good little soldiers who are willing to go and fight in wars that they would otherwise not be willing to be involved in. So
Hey Robert, sorry to interrupt. Could you turn your camera off and see if that helps with the audio? Because people are saying that you sound like you're crackling.
Yeah.
I try. Yeah.
Better.
Let's see. Try saying something.
But yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's still crackling a little bit.
Sorry, I'm using my old PlayStation mic, but I'll cut it a little short.
Okay.
What we do is you fight propaganda, and we go at this with a Marxist lens of creating economic equality, or at least equity, that they won't be able to sell this guns are sexy and war is sexy message anymore. But that's one of the root causes of culture being such a gun nut culture, is that it's by design. The military industrial complex and weapons contractors do things like Black Hawk Down, which is a movie that we know is basically funded by the CIA to pervert and make heroic acts of violence.
All right. Sabby, you want to enlighten us with your thoughts?
I think that a big part of the problem, again, I think it goes back to money in this country. And you have to look at some of these like weapons manufacturers. You have to look at organizations like the NRA. You have to look at the fact that the majority of Americans actually do want some type of background checks for people to be able to purchase a weapon in this country. And then you still have organizations like the NRA saying, no, we don't want that. Like, what's harmful about that? Like, what do you have to hide, right? Because they want to make a sale, because they just want to make the money. And then you have organizations like the NRA that are funding these politicians that we have in DC. So the politicians are not going to vote for the legislation because of who their donors are. So again, I think a lot of this just goes back to big money in politics. And we really have to push back against these corporations and some of these organizations that really control the way politics works in this country. And that's not going to change by voting for more people who go into the two-party system, because the whole system is corrupted by the money. So I think that, again, the big part of the picture is money. Unfortunately, that's a big part of it. Do I think that we should go to the extremes that Canada has announced that they are trying to do, where you can't buy a gun at all? You can't import a gun. You can't. Or Canada's just basically like outlawing all of it, which is interesting because they don't have a high gun violence rate like we do in this country. Do I think we need to go to those extremes? No, I think that's ridiculous. And I think the moment we start saying, or like Beto O'Rourke said, we're going to take your guns away, that is going to make some people panic. Some people get in, bouts of hysteria because of the fact that you're going to take guns away from the American people, but the powers that be, the police and the military, will still have guns. So then you end up living in like an authoritarian state, and that's not how this society should function. So I think that there has to be some type of leeway there, but at the minimum, we could at least have background checks. So I think it's unfortunate that the people in power are not even willing to do that.
Yeah, James, what do you think? Piggying back off of what Sabrina was saying about at least cutting the bleeding a little bit, like doing something about that by having some background checks, doing something like what other countries do, like Japan, for instance, or some of these other European countries where they do a psychological test before people can purchase a gun. The process is a lot longer. Sometimes it could take years. Interviews with families, for example. Do you think that that's something that the U.S. should implement to at least stop the bleeding a little bit when it comes to these mass shootings?
I think that the United States should implement something that makes it's kind of hard because it's like we need our arms to protect ourselves because the police aren't going to do it, especially for people who look like me. But at the same time, you want other people to be protected too, as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this for a fact that the Democrats and Republicans are not going to allow this to happen. Even when it comes to background checks, they're not going to allow it because it's profitable for them. Because if you have more mass shootings, then they're going to want to fund the police more. And who gives to these politicians in their coffers? Police unions. And then who gives to the police? The military-industrial complex. But who did military-industrial complex get, their funding from? It comes from Congress. And so there's this cycle, this endless cycle that continues to keep happening. As far as a proper solution, gosh, you have to start off with the system.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that yes, absolutely, you can negate some of the damage from guns. But people are still going to be violent and they're still going to react in that way. So we also it's a multi-pronged approach. It can't just be done with just one thing. But the thing is that they all have to be done at the same time, not just one little piecemeal thing and then another little piecemeal thing a few years later.
Yeah.
It has to be, we have to push it all at the same time. It's basically like turning up multiple microphones in a studio. You have to do them all at the same time, because the thing is that we could do more background checks, which is great, but at the same time, some people are still going to end up doing shootings. They may not be able to do it as fast with an AR-15, but they can still do it with a Glock. And so they may, we also need more healthcare. And then on top of it, we also have to tackle this white supremacist thinking, which is great to have these conversations, but it's perpetuated by some of the, parts of our government that follow the alphabet. So it's a lot. And it's a pretty heavy conversation to have. And I know a lot of things can't be resolved, in the time allotted, but at least people know that it's a systemic issue. And if they can, join together to get out into the streets so that we can basically put fear into the politicians and make them more afraid of us than they are of the oppressive class that they obey, then maybe, just maybe, we can get some semblance of a change. But I just don't know if it'll happen without us actually doing a mass movement out in the streets.
Yeah, Glory Jones, what do you think? And before you answer that, you can try to answer this too, because when talking about like background checks to try to stop the bleeding when it comes to mass shootings, anything that our government tries to pass, don't you think that they're gonna pass anything that'll in the long term benefit corporations more than it'll benefit the people? And also when it comes to background checks, Atris asked a good question about how can we background check the 3D printers. Wouldn't that require police, you think, to like come in and check to see like, oh, are you 3D printing guns?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I agree with background checks on principle, but I feel like also background checks when implemented within the current United Statesian system would create like, you know, a very similar infrastructure of surveillance to that of something like, you know, predictive policing, where it's like, you know, we can have background checks conducted by Palantir, yay. So like it's so hard because like it is like a very, you know, it's a basic method of gun control that I agree with on principle, but if it's implemented in, you know, our society, I can only see it as coming back to harm, you know, the working class and minority communities who will be barred from having the ability to defend themselves. And I mean, to go back to your point as well, Franco, that you made earlier, it's just like um it's just so funny to me, like seeing any politician brag about having, like, you know, like, I'm not beholden to the NRA and gun manufacturers, but like you own stocks with Boeing and Lockheed Martin.
Yeah.
So it's like, no. Back the fuck up. Like, you are perfectly fine with military grade weapons being used on children in Yemen and being and being used on children in Syria and being given to fucking terrorists in like Haiti or South America or the Central African Republic or wherever. So no, I'm not buying this whole like, whoa, we're not beholden to weapons manufacturers shit. Like, yes, you are. Everybody in Congress is. And it's like, that's why one of the things that I loved about the Black Panthers was I felt like there was a huge distinction between a fascination with weapons and a fetishization of weapons. I'm sorry, I butchered that word. I feel like if you study them, there's a clear distinction between, you know, being a whore for weapons and actually caring about your self-defense. Because, you know, Black Panthers did not just go willy-nilly shooting everybody. They did not go, they are like, they're not some of these like Republican congressmen that to garner votes right before Christmas, they pose with like 37 AK-47s in front of a Christmas tree. Like, nah. They used that shit as a legitimate means of self-defense and brandished it as a means to protect their communities. Sorry, motorcycle in the background. I hope y'all didn't hear that. And they used that as a legitimate means to protect their community. And something else about the Black Panthers is it wasn't just guns with them. If you look into the work that the Jonathan Jackson Educational Cadre did in South Central Los Angeles, in the projects of South Central Los Angeles, what they did essentially was they formed an educational cadre in the projects of South Central Los Angeles, and and one of the things that they taught kids was martial arts. So it was not just about guns and weapons with the Black Panthers. It was about legitimate community defense and legitimate self-defense. You know, I think respecting your own self-defense, I think we need to make that, I think that's something that we can do alongside teaching people, like you said, Franco, is teaching people that there is a distinction between weapons fascination and respecting your own self-defense, wanting to protect yourself from the state, wanting to protect yourself from anybody trying to harm your family or your community. And I think, you know, leaning back into those things is something that can help, because like, you know, once you get to weapons fascination, that's when you get into all this bullshit where it's like, oh my god, like, look at this fucking Black Hawk 39 whatever Air Force plane that we have sending to go over bomb some kids in in Somalia. Like, Yeah, I don't know my military grade weapons terminology, and I don't fucking apologize for that. I just know they kill people. But yeah, that's how you get to society, which is like, all gung ho about the Air Force show and that kind of stuff. And, like, I'm not saying that if you're into that, you're a bad person, but like, it does say something about our culture that, like, we would put weapons over, like, legitimate self defense. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of us here can agree that our current police system, that's not going to help us do anything about the mass shootings. We should have more community systems, homeschooling systems, right? I think everyone here agrees that electoral politics, that's not going to be the solution. There has to be more direct action and more community building. At least have conversations with people about how these are things that are more ideal, how relying more on your community will take power away from these corporations that control our politicians and don't actually do anything to solve the issue of mass shootings, in addition to all the other problems that we have. But I want to say, and we can go back here and back and forth. The order doesn't matter here. Whoever wants to say something about this, you can jump in. What about people who, currently they don't live in a community that is ready to have like homeschooling programs or all these other similar programs that organizations like the Black Panthers did? People that have kids that are in school right now because they don't have time, for homeschooling, that they have to work multiple jobs, etc. Whatever the circumstances are, the way that we have our system set up for how students and teachers deal with school shootings, where they're just sitting in a classroom, considering, the how many school shootings we have in the United States year by year. Should we do more than just have these like little drills that we have that I'm sure all of us can remember from elementary, middle, and high school?
Yeah, nah, I'm gonna interject
That just
right
has
there
us be
because
like sitting
yeah,
ducks pretty much. What
yeah,
what do you guys think we should do?
I'm gonna say something right now because I just graduated college, so so like are newly well, I like I'm was just a student, so like I'm very familiar with all the drills and all the nonsense, and it's like, how do the school shooting drills are some of the dumbest fucking thing ever. School shooting protocols are the dumbest fucking thing ever. It's like genuinely, if God forbid a shooter were to show up at your school, what you would have a much 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 better chance of living if you ran the fuck away than if you stayed in a classroom like sitting ducks. I think especially because like especially because in so many instances, like there are a lot of escape points in schools. And that's one of my biggest criticisms to the response to some of the people in this is to be like, oh, well, we just need single point entry into schools. That'll help. And it's like, no, it fucking won't. You saw how the cops act in school shootings. Like, you think they're going to do shit if an actual school shooter comes in? No, they're going to pussy the fuck up like they always do, or they're going to not do anything because they're following orders from their little FBI buddies. Like, that's just the facts. And then, so once they get into the school, how the fuck are the kids going to get out then? Oh, they have one single entry point to get out. So it's just like, a feeding frenzy for some fucking sociopathic monster. Like, no, the protocols are like the dumbest thing ever. It's not gonna help any. Like, every time I've sat in those protocols, sat in the room while it's dark, I've said to myself, no way in hell am I doing this. I remember like the day after the shooting in Douglas happened, I was sitting in the classroom and I'm thinking like, damn, that exit's looking pretty close. Like, if God forbid a school shooter were to enter, my school during my ceramics class, I'm going through that as an exit door and getting the fuck out. I'm not listening to shit. Like, it's not helping. And like cops at schools aren't helping. Militarizing schools isn't helping. That just adds instant blowback to, the black and brown kids at the school, because then they're only facing even more harassment and feeling more threatened. So yeah, you definitely need to not militarize schools. That's definitely not an answer. You definitely need to change protocols. I'm not saying like that there should be, a massive herd or anything like that. No, I'm just saying having them be there like sitting ducks is so fucking dumb. And it's like you're you're condemning like so many kids to death, so many teachers to death by just doing that.
Yeah. Anyone else, feel free to jump in.
I was going to say, I'm familiar with those drills too, because they had us do the same thing. Like we practiced it in college. I practiced it in high school. Like it doesn't, at the time that something like that happens, Glory's right. You're better off running away. You really are, but they train you to do that. They do the same thing. Like when I was an advisor, academic advisor, working at these universities, we had those same drills where they told you to stay put and get shot and killed. When you have exit points, because like most of the rooms have windows, have a way
Yeah.
for you to get out, like you have a better chance if you just run. So I agree with Glory about that. It's just, and also a lot of times, like even though you practice those drills, when that time comes, how many people remember what they were told to do? Because it's not like you practice the drills every month. So it's just, I didn't find those drills to be helpful per se, and Franco, to echo something you said, you're right. Not everybody can do homeschooling. What I would like to see is something that I see more so with younger kids in the community. So when I was younger, I noticed like my mom had a friend and she used to volunteer to babysit for free, like volunteer to watch people's kids for free. And then eventually it got to the point where she basically opened her own daycare in her home. Now there's different paperwork and there's different formalities you have to go through to have that happen. But she was able to take a burden off of people in the neighborhood that really could not afford to pay for daycare. And I wondered, what if you had someone that could do that for people who have kids that are in high school, that are in K through 12, high school, whatever. Just somebody who is a teacher who actually has that certification and they're able to teach and homeschool other people's kids for them. Because I think that's where the difference comes in. Not everyone can sit at home and homeschool their kids. Some people do have to go to work, but what if you do have someone already in your community that is homeschooling? And what if they could help people out in the neighborhood so that parents don't have to worry about those types of situations? So just trying to apply that same method that's used with the daycare kids with kids that are K through 12.
Yeah, I think that's something good to do. To have someone in the community, I don't know, put up ads or whatever. Hey, I'm available for homeschooling or tutoring if anyone wants. If I ever have kids, I think I'm for sure going to homeschool them. I don't want to risk the.
Franco's doing a little family planning. That's so cute. Sorry.
I said the same thing. Franco.
I don't want to risk them like dying in a school shooting. Like seeing how the risks for that are so high in this country. It's insane.
Mm-hmm.
I must be old because I never did school shooting drills when I was.
What
in high
about duck and cover?
No, never. The only thing we did was fire drills. That's how old I am. And
what about JB? What about after Columbine?
We didn't do
when
them.
they had us do it.
We didn't do them. We just didn't. Like, and then for active shooters, a lot of the training that I got from active shooters when I was in the workforce, and one of the biggest rules was run, right? And if that's being the case, then it's like we can apply that to somebody like me that works in a department store, but we can't apply that to kids. And so, and I mean, teach kids to run in the zigzag fashion. I don't know if it's actually a word, but you know what I mean? But something. But the whole deal with just like leaving them there, I mean, this is going to be a gruesome depiction, but that's like shooting, fish in a barrel because they're just contained, and you're really, really risking their lives. So, yeah, I mean, if you can keep your kid out of school, I mean, there's a lot of K through 12 programs, but at the same time, look at our system. Like back in the day, you can survive off of one income, right? And you can have one parent stay home, and be able to do that. But because of the capitalistic system that we have, it geared it so now multiple people in the household have to work, and nobody can stay home with the kid. So I mean, it's just asinine, to be honest with you. But I honestly do think that, yeah, what Glory was saying, yeah, because I saw a report a couple days ago, right after the shooting in Uvalde, where they went to the school and they had this state of the art system that acted against school shooters, where smoke would come down. I think it was CNN report. Smoke was coming down, doors automatically locked, and it's like all these different systems, that happen, and you can actually see cameras and see where the shooter is and all this. But the thing is that costs thousands and thousands of dollars just to implement. And as we all know, a lot of schools are underfunded. Why? Because they get their funding from, property taxes, and some places have more funding than others. So you're gonna have that wealth disparity when it comes to schools. So, I mean, they could probably do that, but they're not going to want to implement that because they're going to be like, well, it's too expensive.
I think ideally also it should be required to teach kids self-defense, but like that should be something mandatory, like in schools, like we have PE or whatever, have a self-defense session or something. But again, if I ever have kids, I would, and if I have the money, I would enroll them in self-defense classes, because I mean, do whatever you can to survive, right? If you're in a situation like that, don't just be a sitting duck. Like if there's an open window, run away. Or if you're ever in the situation where you have to fight, to survive, then do what you have to do.
But I mean, we're still at the point, like, to be honest with you, this conversation shouldn't even be happening.
That's true.
Let's be real. Like
we're doing
this conversation. We're trying to mitigate. We're trying to put like
it's not going at the root issue of it, right?
Yes. And the thing is that's the biggest problem. But the thing is, it's like the powers that be leave us with no recourse, so they force us to have to treat the symptom of the problem instead of treating the underlying issue. And so it's just fucked up all around. I'm gonna be honest with you.
That was poetic, JB.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Very clearly, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I unplugged everything. As I do have a 5-year-old daughter and another kid on the way, and I'll tell you just what me and my wife have discussed as far as a pragmatic approach. I agree with everything you guys are saying. What we are going to do is we're going to teach our kids to know all of the exits of all of their schools, and for them to, as soon as they hear something like that, to find the nearest exit and run the same way you would do if there was a fire. But beyond that, I think it helps, and this goes back to Franco's community perspective. We're going to also introduce them to people that have houses that live around their school. So if they need to leave the school and knock on a door to get in a house of somebody that happens to be an acquaintance, I'm going to know people all around my kids' schools, and I'm going to talk to them. Listen, if there's a shooting going on, I expect you to just take my kids in and harbor them, because you're not going to have a school shooter leave the school to chase kids down. They're going to stay in the school and shoot. They're going to go after people that are trapped. So my idea has always been, know your exits, memorize kind of where you can get away, and you just run. You don't go to your locker. You don't go grab a friend. You get out of the school. You go to the nearest house of somebody that we've already we already know is somebody that is going to let you in. You knock on the door, tell them what's going on, and you just get out because they're not going to chase you. So that, I mean, if I can give any advice, which I have no idea because this has not been studied, but there's no way I'm going to have my kid do what some of these drills have you do, which is just cower in a corner and hope that somebody with an AK doesn't shoot the door lock out. We're going to go elsewhere, and I'm going to try to make as many contacts as I can with people who live around my kid's school so that they have a place to go immediately. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, someone in the chat, ICU, brought up a great point about what about the disabled kids? When it comes to these school shooting drills, they're oftentimes the last ones to leave.
Yeah.
So I mean, we can talk about runaway and everything, but what about children who are disabled or children who have mental disabilities?
You need to count on the teachers having good training or something. In that
pretty
case,
much.
you have to train all the teachers to be aware that they need to help, and you need somebody to be willing to be a hero in that case, because they're not going to have the same advantage. You know,
Oh boy.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we're at least, you know, in agreement here that our politicians are not going to save us at all. I mean, we have some people in, you know, the independent, quote unquote, independent media circle that are trying to run for office now, acting as if that's going to save anything, save anything, do anything, when they're just going to be dealing with legislation that is passed by and written by lobbyists. So that's not a real solution. You know, it sucks that we have to take matters into our own hand, but at the very least, it's at least raising our awareness. And you know, more and more people are realizing that the whole system is messed up, and we really got to change things. So we'll wrap up here. Just some closing remarks from all of you. We can go around. What do you want to leave the audience with? We can start with anyone here. And by the way, thank you guys very much for being on. I think we had a lovely conversation.
Thanks for having us, Franco.
yeah. What I'd just leave with my same stump speech. If you want to fight crime, you don't beef up the police budget. You defund the police budget and make people feel less anxiety laden and fearful of the system that is oppressing them. So you want to fix crime, you want to fix mass shootings, you fix poverty, and you defund the police. The police are not there to protect you. The police are there to be the lapdog security service of the bourgeoisie. That's all that their function is. And if there's one thing we've learned from Uvalde and then other things in the past, is that the police are there to on the INN stream last night I was on, we talked about a pregnant black lady that got shot by police 5 times during a traffic stop. The police are more than willing to pull the trigger a bunch of times when it comes down to black and brown people who don't have anything in their hands, who aren't doing anything wrong. But when it comes down to stopping mass shootings, they're nowhere to be found. The police don't exist to do that type of thing. They're there to harass the proletariat, which is poor people. And, what we need to do is defund them. They are perpetrators of violence, not the preventers of violence. And if you fight poverty, defund the police, you will fight extremism and fanaticism. And I'm obviously open to any other ideas as far as, getting mental health care out to people. If you want to do common sense gun reform, and of course, completely revamping the way that we view school shooting drills would be fantastic. I'm open to all ideas because, of course, this is awful.
I'll just add that, again, I think one thing we've all come to realize is that our politicians are just not going to be the ones to save us. And I think one of the ways that we can cut violence is to, fix poverty issue. Some of that can be done by mutual aid. Some of that can be done by direct action, believe it or not. So I think we need to build community and get to know the people in our community, our neighbors. Some of us may not even know their names. I think that's where this is going to come from. I don't think it's really going to come from the people that are supposedly in power. So I think as long as we continue to build community and work with each other, I think that we can have a better outlook in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just to harp on Robert and Sabrina's point, community is one of the primary things I think that we need to you know bring back up and kind of make it cool to know your neighbors again.
Hmm.
And also we have to also have class solidarity, and being able to push for these things that treat the underlying issues. I'm gonna be real with you. If they're not going to do comprehensive gun reform after a bunch of little white kids were shot down in Sandy Hook, they're not
In
going to protect any
Parkland.
of your kid. They're
Hmm.
And
not
Parkland.
in Parkland. They're not going to protect you or your kids. And the thing is that part of that has to do with tackling the systemic underlying issues first. But here's the crazy part that they know, but they don't want you to know that tackling those issues doesn't just solve or help to solve, I should say, the gun violence issue, but it also helps to solve things like the homelessness issue. It helps to solve the people who don't have healthcare issue. It starts to get to the point where we start to look at, oh well, if you guys can get our material benefits up in this way, what else can you do? And then we start to become more minded of, well, I guess we have more power than we thought, and this is what they don't want. Because then that means that we're now pushing for a more substantive, concrete change for our material conditions. But it is absolutely necessary for our survival because they don't care if we kill each other because ultimately they're still going to make more money anyway. So this is one of the reasons why it's best for us to band together, including because there are some people who might be conservative who are sick and tired of this too. They're sick and tired of the thoughts and prayers. They're like, screw the thoughts and prayers. What are we doing about it? And so it's like, okay, do you guys want to do something about mental health? Okay, fine. Let's push for healthcare, true healthcare, right, for everybody. So the thing is that there has to be a solidarity taking place, especially from a class analysis standpoint, so that we can basically make demands so they stop killing us or allowing us to be killed because it'll keep happening and they just don't care.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I'll just say, first and foremost, fuck 12. Um, and yeah, to go back to the closing point that Robert made, or one of them, um, you're not gonna fix society, especially violence, by making a community resemble a prison. I mean, I'm sure, like, especially knowing the amount of, fights and depression and anxiety that, actual prisoners in jail and in prison go through, making society resemble that hellscape isn't going to solve the problem. You have to make people, more, you have to be able to make people feel more materially secure, at least, or like just more, like less stressed, less full of anxiety, less depressed, less wanting to engage in, what would be considered a crime, when in reality it's just, a survival mechanism in a lot of instances. So yeah, beefing up the police, making our schools resemble a prison, is nowhere near the solution that we need. And it's definitely something that needs to change. But on that note, I do caution against, the March for Our Lives protest. Um, that movement's already been thoroughly co-opted. Um, so, and I'm saying this as someone who, I don't know the kids personally, but I tangentially know them just through virtue of being in similar grades to them, and also, you know, being familiar with some of their backgrounds and knowing how they got so beefed up by celebrities and Democratic politicians. I definitely think that we should protest this, but also do keep in mind that March for Our Lives is thoroughly co opted. And, you know, that's not saying to not go because, I mean, like, but yeah, nah, this is definitely something that needs to change. And again, I just want to emphasize the point as well of, like, you know, value it, you know, it's not wrong to value self-defense, but we do have a problem with the over fetishization of weapons themselves, you know, the soulless part of that, the weapons. And that, and you know, that's where we lead into this fascination with the military as well. So yeah, get rid of the military industrial complex too, and we won't see it coming back home and biting us in the ass in these terrible ways, and we won't see, and we'll at least see less of this. And then, you know, to get with the mental health angle, and obviously there's so many things, like James like JB Font said, there's like, it's a multi-pronged approach. Like, there's so many different facets of this problem. So I can't, so you know, I can't possibly cover every facet of the problem, and I can't possibly cover every facet of the solution. But you know, in the immediate term, we can have, you know, empathy for our school children. We can have empathy for those victims. We can teach people how to defend themselves in this situation. We can foster a community of self-defense like we know how to do because we've done it in our history. So we can lean into that and, you know, take some sort of solidarity in that until we get this larger systemic reform. Not systemic reform, until we get this larger systemic abolishment that we fucking need. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Start a whole new system that's more ideal, more aware, more conscious. And to get there, these conversations are really important to have. And I thank you all once again for coming on the show. Now, everybody in the audience, let me know what you guys think. Do you guys agree with everything that was discussed here? Let us know in the comment section, but also make sure you subscribe to all these people's channel. They do excellent work. And as always, guys, stay informed.
Love y'all.